Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for welcoming me to spend a little bit of time with you today. As Katerina said, my name is Aleta Margolis. I am a mother, a wife, a daughter, an artist, and a social entrepreneur, and I'm very proud of all of those aspects of my identity. But I'm especially proud to tell you that I'm a teacher. As Katerina said, that's something in which I take great pride, and I understand we have some educators with us today, which makes me so happy. It's wonderful, wonderful to be with all of you. I'll tell you a little bit about my story and the role that questioning has always had in my life. Nearly 30 years ago, after several years as a public school teacher, as Katerina said, I founded Center for Inspired Teaching here in Washington, D.C., where I was born. My mother and my grandfather were born here too, so this is the city where my roots are firmly planted. Through inspired teaching, I strive to ensure every child in every classroom in our city, in our region, and in our country gets to learn how to be curious, gets to have their curiosity stimulated and supported. I believe every child has the right and the responsibility to learn to ask great questions. And as Katerina said, in my faith, Judaism, we're not only allowed to ask questions, we are expected to ask questions. And so even we're supposed to question the teachings of our own faith. So at the Passover Seder each year, as you may know, if you're familiar with the Passover Seder, we speak of 4 types of children: the wise child, the wicked child, the simple child, and the child who has no capacity to inquire. I appreciate the intention behind this part of the Seder. The adults are expected to engage each kind of child. The idea is we want to make sure all children are learning their heritage. They all hear the Passover story, that we make sure we appeal to all different kinds of kids. But each year, reading about these 4 types of children sparks many questions in my mind, especially when I hear about the child who has no capacity to inquire. Because I don't believe such a child exists. All humans, I believe, are born with the capacity to ask questions, to be curious about the world around us. So, well-meaning adults, sometimes we can shut down that curiosity. We can even extinguish that capacity to inquire. And sometimes, I would actually say more than sometimes, this shutting down of kids' curiosity happens in school. And this is the problem I am striving to address through my work with Center for Inspired Teaching. So I will tell you a little bit about how I got started. As I mentioned, I grew up in DC, and after I graduated from college, I went to Brown University and came back here to Washington, DC, which honestly, I never thought I would do, but I got a wonderful job working for a theater company that had a very small grant to start a program teaching playwriting to high school students in the juvenile justice system here in DC. And I was a theater major. I studied improvisational theater. I studied acting and directing and dance, and was planning to become a professional actor. And so I thought, well, this is kind of a theater gig. I'm teaching playwriting to kids, and I can build my craft as an actor and an artist. In my work with the young people, and I was 22, 23, my students were 17, 18. So we were pretty much the same age at the time. In my work with the young people, we did the process I knew how to do, which was teaching playwriting. And the students went through the process of identifying the challenges and the realities in their lives as sort of the setting, the basis for their play. This was in the school year 1989-90. And if you've been in DC a while, you may recall that this was the time we were called the murder capital of the world. There was a crack cocaine epidemic. Our mayor, Marion Barry, was arrested for crack cocaine possession. It was a rough time to be a young person growing up in DC. And all of my students were involved in the law, which is how they were part of this process. So as I was talking them through how they were part of this program that I was a part of, as I was talking them through the playwriting process, the students came up to me one at a time, and literally every single child said, listen, I'm functionally illiterate. I don't read and write. And I thought, how do they know this phrase, functionally illiterate? Who taught them that about themselves? But so I was 22, I was young. I thought, okay, great, no problem. I had my boombox because it was 1989. So I said, we're gonna go through the process, and when it's time for you to write your character's story, here's your tape, you'll record it, you'll give me your cassette, I'll transcribe it, and you'll have your character. So we went through the process. The students wrote this extraordinary play that involved a time machine and archaeology and all sorts of amazing things about exploring what might have been going on in the past, because they set their play in the year 3000 when Washington, D.C. had been destroyed. And they went back as archaeologists and excavated the site, and they found artifacts. They found this green paper with white guys' faces in the middle and numbers on the side. And they found these bags of white powder, and they found these metal things with triggers and barrels, and they wondered what all these artifacts might be. And then they took their time machine back up to the year 3000, and they learned about the artifacts, and they learned the story of what was going on. And they also made recommendations for how to improve their community that were brilliant and beautiful. But so here it is, it's time to get the play codified. I said, okay, everybody give me your cassette. And every single student said, no, these are my words. I'm writing them. And they did, because of course they could write. Something had happened, I realized, in their education that taught them what they couldn't do, that taught them their limitations, that labeled them in a certain way. And of course, there were many, many factors leading to the fact that these young people found their way into the juvenile justice system: systemic racism, poverty, of course, many factors outside the classroom. But I started to wonder, I started to ask the question, what must have happened in their school experience that led them down a certain path? And what if they had had a different kind of school experience? What if they had had teachers who expected them to be able to read it and write and gave them work that was meaningful and worthwhile to them, instead of the work that certainly I had in school that was kind of like, fill in the blank and not so meaningful and not so motivating. And that experience and the questions sparked by that experience made me decide I wanted to become a teacher. So I went to graduate school. I earned my teaching degree. I taught outside of Chicago. I taught middle school, which I love all ages, but I must say I particularly love teaching middle schoolers. And this is as a parent of two former middle schoolers. We all survived, barely, but we did. So I taught middle school, I taught elementary school, and I actually then came back to DC and taught at American University in the School of Education, teaching teachers. And I loved teaching young people, but I found that there was a status quo. There was still an assumption that was being made by so many of my teaching colleagues, many of whom were in their 20s as I was. So we were young at the age when you're supposed to be kind of idealistic. And we were saying, some kids just can't learn math. Oh, well, some kids just can't learn fill in the blank. And I was just getting, I was like, what? That can't be okay. How can we be okay with that? And my then boyfriend, now husband of 32 years, would, stay up at night counseling me and consoling me. And he sort of said, finally, you either have to like stop getting upset and being up at night crying, or do something about it. So I for the past 30 years or so, I have been trying to do something about it. In 1995, I started Center for Inspired Teaching based on the question, what if we reimagined the role of the teacher? What if we reimagined what the teacher does? And at Inspired Teaching, we call teachers instigators of thought. We believe it's our job as teachers, well, I'm just going to take something straightforward like math, right? In the math problem, I can say, okay, here are the steps, follow me. I'm going to write them on the board. Now you do what I said. I'm telling you how to solve the math problem. But instead, what if I said, well, what do you think you should do here? What have you tried before? Does this math problem look similar to something you've done before? Give it a try. And if you make a mistake, you know what happens? Nothing. You try again until you figure it out. And of course, that approach is not only for math problems, it's for all academics, and it's for engaging with people. What if I meet a person who's different from the way that I am, who has a different viewpoint, who votes differently, who's from a different part of the world? What if I approach them with curiosity? what might I learn? What might happen, instead of approaching them with assumption based on their zip code, their race, their age, their language, all manner of things. So that question, what if teachers changed their role? What if curiosity was central? Was and is at the core of Center for Inspired Teaching. And as Katerina said, I'll give you a quick overview of inspired teaching. It's very hard to do that in less than 7 hours, but I'll give you a quick overview, and I know we'll have time for questions, and if you have them, I'd be delighted to tell you more. But in brief, at Inspired Teaching, we invest in teachers because I'm a teacher, and we know that teachers are the most important. There's actually research that shows what to me is obvious. Teachers are the most important school-based input factor in kids' success, of course. So why not invest in teachers? We teach teachers pre-K through 12, all grade levels, how to spark their students' curiosity and how to bring joy to the learning experience. And we teach teachers through improvisation, because as you may recall, as I mentioned, my background is a theater person, as an actor, as an artist. And again, I can tell you more, but in brief, what the connection is an improvisational actor has a clear goal. I know what I'm going to do. I've got my goal. I'm not going to get diverted. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm going to stick to my goal, but I'm going to welcome surprise, whether it's a crazy suggestion from the audience or a crazy idea my scene partner brings in. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to incorporate it, and I'm going to stay focused on my goal. So as teachers, our surprise is often student input. A child may say, I have 5 cats and 2 of them threw up this weekend. And I'm thinking, okay, we're learning about fractions. Well, what fraction of your cats threw up this weekend? I'm going to take the input and I'm going to use it toward my goal. Sometimes it's joyful and fun like that. Sometimes it can be very painful for teachers teaching in difficult times or even violent times, which I'll talk about in a little while. But again, that's all input. I must respect that input while staying clearly focused on my goal as an inspired teacher. So at Inspired Teaching, we started in 1995. We're almost 30 years old. We've taught teachers here in Washington, D.C., our home, across the region, around the country, and around the world. And I'll give you just a few examples. After completing our year-long Inspired Teaching Institute, one of our teachers, Wahida Mbatha, moved to Johannesburg, where she founded the Kigolo Academy, a school for girls based in inspired teaching. And I have not been to visit, but I hope to go one day in the not too distant future. Another teacher who earned her teaching certificate through inspired teaching, we used to run a teacher preparation program. She founded Red Bridge Education, which is a charter school in California that focuses on building students' agency. The whole school, the whole curriculum is built around building kids' independence and agency. We've led teacher trainings at schools in India, in Thailand, and in Turkey, and of course, throughout the DC region, mostly, but in some really amazing places. In the summer of 2023, so last summer, about a little less than a year and a half ago, we started a partnership with a wonderful organization called Osvitoria, which is the leading education NGO in Ukraine. So far, we've trained over 1,000 Ukrainian teachers, including a wonderful high school teacher who spent a week at my home this summer so that she could participate in our Inspired Teaching Institute in person. Our other training has been live and recorded virtual, but Aleta came and was able. It was her first time in the US. We did all the amazing tourist things at night, and during the day she came to our institute. And now she's back in Kyiv teaching her students and teaching all of her colleagues using the inspired teaching method, because a big part of the way we spread inspired teaching is through what we call a train the trainers model. So we'll teach many teachers who then teach their colleagues, and because we believe in supporting teachers' agency and professionalism, that we want to support and strengthen them so they can do the same for their colleagues. And we're delighted that Olena is doing that back in Kyiv with her colleagues. So one of the many questions that we ask at Inspired Teaching is, what changes happen for children when their teachers encourage them to ask questions? And I'll go back again to the partnership with Osvitoria, with the teachers in Ukraine, and tell you how that started. I met their founder, Osvitoria's beautiful founder, Zoya Litvin, who is an amazing social entrepreneur who founded Osvitoria to bring world-class education to all children in Ukraine. She started it before the war. She continues it now. And she told me when we met just a year ago, so of course, during the war, she said, I want to bring inspired teaching to teachers in Ukraine because I want our country, Ukraine, to have the best education system in the world. And she said with just absolute certainty, like, this is the plan so that we can make sure Ukraine is strong today and into the future. And my colleagues and I were amazed, and we remain amazed by her hopeful spirit and by her belief that she can make change in her community and her country. And after meeting many of her colleagues, many of her teaching colleagues, I continue to feel their hope and strength. And I think the right word, honestly, is optimism, even as they are teaching in the middle of war. So our work in Ukraine and across the world is built on this question around curiosity. It's built on many questions. Another one is, what if teachers focused on meeting students' needs? How can we help our students to thrive by meeting their needs? And I'm going to show you a brief series of, here we go. Can you see my screen here? All right. So one of the things we do, we take the work of all sorts of psychologists and researchers and boil it down into something that's really usable in the classroom. So this tool we call the ABCDE of learner needs. And we're talking about kids, but we're also talking about us because we are learners. So we have come up with 6, because we do A, B, C, D, E, F, of learner needs based on the work of psychologist William Glasser and many other experts. And A is for autonomy. And I'll show this with you and I'll share with you after. We have a whole series of free resources on our website for teachers and people who want to understand this tool. So I'll share it with you and you're welcome to use it. Going through it, the first one is A for autonomy. I need to have a say in what happens to me. I need to make choices and I need to build independence. And when you think of the school experience for young children or children of any age, that's not always a need that's met. Usually when we're in school, we're told where to sit, what we're going to study, what page to be on, how to show, how to take the test, how to do the work. So where is the opportunity for young people to make choices? And as we started doing our work with teachers in Ukraine, we asked, we know you're teaching in extraordinary situations that were very hard for my colleagues and me to imagine, sometimes in bomb shelters, sometimes virtually, sometimes in buildings without knowing from day to day what would happen. But we are hearing from our teaching colleagues that these needs are really supporting the students and the teachers, and we are so grateful for that. So I'll move on to B. B is belonging. I need to be valued by and connected to others through collaboration, sharing, and caring. And you may be aware, I'm sure you are, we're in a mental health crisis for young people, though I have to tell you, an article just came out, I think last week, that is talking about the mental health crisis of parenting, which I appreciate. I have 2 young adult daughters whom I adore, but my goodness, parenting is also challenging these days as well. But the focus on young people, so much of the mental health crisis is targeted to loneliness and isolation, as of course you know. And so our focus in school, but it's in any area of community, is on belonging. We've defined this as school connectedness. So whether I'm teaching in Ukraine or Washington, D.C. or Johannesburg, how do I show my students I value them? Not pretend, but how do I actually value them? And create situations where they feel a sense of belonging and value with one another. And this sense of belonging is critical to that. C is competence. It's an inner sense of pride, importance, and self-esteem, and an outer sense of being heard and respected. It's really feeling smart, is how I explain it. So if you think about when I was teaching 6th grade, you have the 6th grader, you say, okay, please stand up and read from the textbook to the class. And the young man comes in or the young woman comes in and kicks over a desk. And you think like, oh, this is a bad kid, we need to give them detention. That's one way of dealing with that behavior. A different way is asking the question, what might be an unmet need that this child is communicating to me? Because all behavior from children and adults is communication. So maybe it's an unmet need for competence. Maybe this young person feels threatened. I can't read in front of the class, like my young students who I taught when I was teaching playwriting. If I had said stand up and read aloud, their need for competence would have been threatened, and they might have done something to distract from the feeling stupid that comes when my need for competence is threatened. But if we as teachers and humans understand this, we can address people from a different place, from an asset-based place instead of a deficit-based place. So D, developmental appropriateness, the right amount of challenge. I want it to be hard enough, but not too hard, easy enough, but not too easy, fueled by just enough skill to get through the difficulty. It's learning for all of us. It's good to be challenged. It's good to step outside of our comfort zone a little. If you're way outside of your comfort zone, you can shut down. But if you're doing the same thing the same way every day, you're not learning. And that also fuels boredom and lack of engagement, which happens to be E. So E is for engagement. It's a need. We need to problem solve. We need to make interesting decisions. We need to interact with others through worthwhile tasks. And then finally, did you know there's research that proves that fun is a human need? And I have to say, these are needs for kids. They're also needs for us as adults. My staff and I always do activities where we look at our own needs. And for me, this is the one I'm working on. As you all know, because I know you're committed to social change, the idea of having fun for myself can feel very indulgent and oh, I shouldn't do that. I've got important work to do. But actually, I need to have fun. You need to have fun. Kids need to have fun. We need to learn through play. We need to experience joy and to have learning opportunities beyond the ordinary. So this is the work that we have based our partnership with Osvatoria in, and all of our work with teachers is based in our ABCDE of learner needs. So let's see, each day, some more questions. Each day I ask myself the question, what can I do to support young people's needs? And of course, what can I do to support my own needs? Or at least I try to remember to ask that question. As Rich said, this past weekend was Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It's a day of atonement. It's also a day of reflection and a day of learning from the past, and for me, dreaming of a better future. In my synagogue, we sang a song yesterday called I Will Build This World from Love. It was written by Rabbi Menachem Creditor in 2002, and it was written for the naming of his child, in honor of the naming of his child. But many people believe he wrote it also in response to the terrorist attacks here in the US on 9/11, just a year prior in 2001. Here are the lyrics to the song. I will build this world from love, and you must build this world from love. And if we build this world from love, then God will build this world from love. It's a song I've sung many times over the years, and I always find it moving. But this time I noticed something new. The last two lines read, and if we build this world from love, then God will build this world from love. So suddenly I had a question. Doesn't the song have it backwards? Isn't God supposed to lead and we're supposed to follow? And I really pondered that for a little while. I thought, well, wait a minute, we have to do it first. But of course, I think that's the point, right? This question, I pondered it. I'm still grappling with it, but it's leading me to a deeper understanding that maybe God isn't the cause, but God is the result. Maybe we're not supposed to wait for God to fix things to build the world from love. Maybe we need to do it ourselves. And then when we do, God will be there working alongside us. So I'm pondering that question. I leave you with the question, how can you build this world from love? What are you already doing to build the world from love? And what else can you do? My answer, of course, is, well, it's evolving all the time, but my answer is that I teach teachers and I teach children from a place of love, from a place of curiosity, and from a place of joy. So thank you all for inviting me to spend time pondering questions with you today. And I hope that I get the opportunity to hear some of your questions.
Thank you very much. That was really beautifully said and very thought-provoking at so many different levels. I'll just start with a reflection. I'm going to then open up to everybody for questions. Just my immediate reflection is thank you. I think the question you raised at the very end is the one I wrestle with too all the time, which is what's my role and what's God's role, and what do I need to do and when do I need to wait, and I'm supposed to lead, but am I going, so it's that delicate dance that you talked about, and I love that song about building love. And so I want to just acknowledge that that's something I wrestle with all the time. And I also, I love that you're teaching people to ask questions, but I have to say, behind the scenes, what I'm really amazed about in your story is that you have a vision and you're navigating it through a very challenging bureaucracy. And when you're trying to change the world, I mean, it all sounds fine and good. I think one of the reasons so many people don't want to engage in social change is it's so hard. And the schools are allergic to a lot of, and it's amazing that they're allowing you, not allowing you, you've institutionalized it, and then you're taking it more broadly. But a lot of the institutions that we need right now, like education, churches repel people all the time. The faith communities repel people all the time who are trying to do good works. Our politics right now is very repelling of people who want to do good, and we're not attracting people who want to do good. So it's what I really admire about your story. I want to acknowledge it first is that you've had a good idea. A lot of people have good ideas, an inspired idea, and then you had the tenacity to figure out how do I get this into the systems because the kids really need it. And so I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's sort of like, it wasn't mentioned, but it's behind the scenes, and that's where I find the frustration in the world is like, how do I do it? How do I do it? I don't know if you want to say a little bit about how you did it, like how do you first kick the door open when you went from, I'm doing improv and I could do it at your school, and they're like, we don't have a line item for that in our budget.
No, I'm happy to. So when I first started, I was literally doing, before I started the organization, when I was figuring out what I was doing, I was literally doing free workshops for teachers at any school that would let me in the door. That was a big part of what I was up to. And then the truth is, the reason I started Inspired Teaching, other than because my husband couldn't take my complaining anymore, and he's been by my side, a co-worker, not officially, but in many ways ever since. But part of why I started it was I was doing all these workshops for teachers. I was teaching at American University, bringing kids from an organization that you may know here in DC called For Love of Children, where I had worked, and I loved their work, bringing kids from Flock, For Love of Children, to campus at AU so that my teaching students could work with real children instead of hypothetical children. And we needed money for the van, and we needed, how do you raise money? And to raise money, you have to become a 501c3. Well, how do you do that? This was literally why I started Inspired Teaching. And for better or for worse, we've always been mission first and structure second, which is, I'm very proud of it, but it can be exhausting. But in our work, we respect the teacher's reality, right? You have to get good test scores. You have to follow the rules. You have to, keep order, whatever the expectation is, right? We're not asking you don't create systemic change by asking everybody to be a revolutionary, because they will get fired, right? And I'm very aware from a place of equity to say to someone like, who cares if you get fired? Do what's right. Well, you care if you get fired if this is your livelihood, right? So you can't expect every teacher to be a risk taker. So what we've done very strategically from day one is aligned everything we do with what's required of teachers. And that's great. Like I don't love tests, but that's fine. You can give kids a test as long as you also offer them an opportunity to give a speech and have a debate and do an art project. Fine, you can also take a test. And we say to teachers, the test, teaching is about problem solving. The test is a problem to be solved. Okay. So what do we have to do here? Well, the test is going to make us, we have these multiple choice questions. That's fine. Let's be upfront with the kids about what we're learning and prepare for the test, recognizing it is one of many things we value. It's not the only one. And so we're very clear about aligning our work with what teachers need to do. We were not loud and proud about improv initially. We said, we're going to help you be an effective teacher. And then teachers would show up and we'd be like, by the way, we work barefoot and there are no chairs and desks, and come join me in a circle and we're going to start with a song. People were kind of like, oh boy. Now, what's interesting, and I like to think we get to take some credit for this. Improv is the thing now. People are hiring improv companies to come do trainings for their corporations. We've done these too, but just on the side, right? Trainings for their law firms, trainings for their teachers. It's a thing now. So now when we say improv, people say, oh yeah, I heard that's good. So we're glad that we can be out front about it. But even now, we're very mindful about making sure we are deeply aligned. For example, the DC public schools have recently adopted SEL, social emotional learning standards that were developed. They've adopted them, that were developed by an organization called Castle that came out with these standards over a decade ago. We've been aligned with Castle's standards since they came out. So now we can say to DC teachers and principals and district leaders, when you take our class, you're getting trained in the DC standards. Great. And so and they are, it is true. So we're very mindful about connecting to the things that teachers are held accountable for. We just do it. We don't sit there and do a PowerPoint on standards. We engage them fully.
Thank you, Aleta. And I noticed that in your program, you say to kids, we'll kind of meet you where you are, and what you're saying to the adults that you're working with, the same thing. You translate into their values too, where they are, because they do. So thank you for that. I want to open it up to any questions that anybody has. If you just raise your hand or turn off your mic. Ross, go ahead. I see your hands up.
Yeah, I wish my wife was here. We'll have to play the recording for her. She's a wonderful teacher. We homeschooled our 3 kids, not from the standpoint of, evangelical Christianity, but from the standpoint of the kids found that school was a waste of time. And she was growing up in this wonderful Montgomery County system where she experienced exactly what you said, discouraged to ask questions. And so we've created kids, she has created kids that definitely ask questions. But it's great to hear that there's a systemic effort like yours to get away. And I don't know whether it's still true that in Montgomery County kids are discouraged from asking questions, but that was certainly my wife's experience as a student.
Well, it was mine too until I went to college, except for a couple of notable, beautiful, exceptional teachers. But for the most part, it was. What I attribute it to, and I've written a lot about this, is, no teacher, nobody goes into teaching saying like, I'm here to squash kids' curiosity, right? That's not, we go into teaching because we love young people, we love our subject matter, we love learning. But what happens is there's an urgency that's good in some ways, right? We need to teach kids. We have a lot to teach them. It's important. That's great. But then time becomes a really valuable commodity and almost a negative force. So, for example, I have 37 minutes for this literacy lesson on, the Odyssey. And if you ask a question, I don't have time for that question. I'm down to 36 minutes now, and we've already wasted a minute with your question. I've got 10 topics, 10 points I must cover because I know it's on, let's say, well, let me even pick up more higher stakes. AP US History, Advanced Placement US History. We have a test in the spring. I need my kids to get 4s and 5s so they can get into good colleges. That's a real issue, right? You're asking a question about the US Constitution and whether random locker searches are constitutional, which when I did my student teaching in 8th grade, and this was the question, this is when we were doing random locker searches looking for drugs. And what a great question. Does the Constitution protect my right as a 14-year-old to not have my private locker searched? So anyway, we did a whole thing on that. But many teachers would feel that's a great question. It's not on the test. We don't have time for it. Sorry, we got to get through the long list of things you must learn. So that again is and it's a real pressure on teachers. So this is not, the teachers trying to do harm to kids. This is the teachers trying to do their jobs. And this is why when I speak, of course I speak to teachers, but I also speak to community members, and I also think parents are a very important lever here. We as a society, particularly parents, need to change our expectations of teachers. Because right now, a good teacher keeps the kids quiet and basically gets them through the curriculum on time. And that's kind of it. So if that's what I'm supposed to do to be good at my job, then that's what I will do. But if I'm expected as a teacher to be an instigator of thought, to welcome my students' questions, and if I'm offered the tools to know how to do that, then I'll do that. So I really think the answer here is changing what we expect of our teachers and then supporting them in being, again, I would call them instigators of thought.
Excellent. Anyone else? Roxanne.
I love the concept of what you're talking about. My issue is, or my concern is, the divergent thought, the thought that doesn't necessarily align with social expectations, because that's equally as legitimate, and making space for those questions in the classroom.
Roxanne, can you, I can tell this is so important. Can you give an example? Because I can imagine that being in so many directions. Can you give an example of the kind of thought or question that you're thinking of as a divergent thought that I can focus my response with that in mind?
Well, I've heard, given the political environment that we're in right now, I mean, I've heard about school kids who, in democratic
Right.
situations or communities, who want to support
Right.
Republicans,
Okay.
or,
Yeah. Yeah.
just how do
Yeah.
you deal with it?
How do you deal with it? Well, I will do my best to answer your question. It's really hard and it's so important. So I will start by sharing a statistic that I realize now I don't remember exactly, which I should, because we've been sharing it in grant proposals. Education Week, which is a big, well-known national education publication, did a survey, let's say in July or so, of teachers nationwide. And about 2/3, I'm going to say it was 67%, but about that, of teachers said before the school year started, I will not be discussing the election with my kids this year. Not doing it. Okay, so that's the plan. So and you know why? Because they're afraid they'll get fired, because they're ill-equipped, because of your question. Like, what do I do if there's a Republican among a sea of Democrats or a Democrat among a sea of Republicans? What do I do? So we have started and are launching a program called Speak Truth America. And it's based, I'm going to get to your question, but I'm going to give you the wide angle answer and then the more focused. It's based in a program we've been running for 10 years called Speak Truth, where we teach teachers to bring together students. This is primarily high school, though we've done it with middle and even elementary school students. We teach teachers to bring together students to talk about every issue you can imagine. Pick your controversial topic. The kids have discussed it. And here's the deal. The goal is not to reach consensus. So I'm not going to convince you to vote for my guy. That is not what we're up to here. The goal is to share my perspective and for you to listen to me with curiosity, which is the highest form of respect, because it's the opposite of assumption and prejudice. And then you're going to tell me your perspective, and I need to listen with curiosity. And these conversations, so again, we teach the teachers to teach the kids how to do this. The conversations are facilitated by the young people, by the students. We have a whole thanks to the pandemic, our funders enabled us to make everything free and online. So I can share with Katerina the link. We have a whole guidebook on how to do this that's free online for downloading. But we teach young people to lead their peers in these conversations. And again, the goal is not to reach consensus. The goal is for me to say to you, you know, that's so interesting. I never thought of it that way. I'm still not voting for your guy, but that's really an interesting perspective that hadn't occurred to me before. Another thing, sort of the catchphrase of Speak Truth America is, I disagree with you doesn't have to mean I hate you. And we are in the process of we hope to, if we get funding for it, build this program out to work with teachers in red states and blue states across the country after the election, because regardless of what happens, we will be divided after the election, to have these conversations in their classrooms and then via Zoom with kids, you know, in different parts of the country, so that students can hear opposing viewpoints. I'll share with you an example. After the Parkland school shooting a number of years ago, the students wanted to discuss, as you may recall, there were proposals to arm teachers. There still are, right? Teachers should have guns. And the students wanted to discuss these. So they did. That was a Speak Truth session. And in that time, most of our sessions were in person and were DC based. So we had diverse views, but we didn't have the kids, we give them a survey after, and their complaint was we didn't have anybody who was adamantly on the other side, who said we should arm teachers. And the kids complained and they said, how come we didn't get to hear that view? I want to hear that view. And so we found a young man who, it was a junior ROTC, who had a different view, who said, you know what, if I had my gun, I could have helped. And it was just again, didn't change my view, didn't change necessarily those students' views, but they got to hear a different side. So I think the answer to your question is changing the goal. The goal is not to reach consensus. The goal, what if we, and we encourage teachers to do this, we do it ourselves. What if we opened a class discussion and said, okay, you guys, today, my ninth graders, here's the deal. We're going to have a good day if everybody at 3 o'clock can tell me you heard something, you heard a perspective you've never heard before. That's the goal. That's it. That's all we're trying to do today. We're going to talk about the election. We're going to talk about whatever. But the goal is for you to hear a perspective you haven't heard before. And then you practice, right? You practice saying things like, you know, Roxanne, I really disagree with you, but wow, I never thought of it that way. Okay, that's really interesting. So I think sometimes we believe that if I listen to someone I disagree with, I'm condoning, I'm supporting their views. And that's fair. That can feel that way. So we state the ground rules, that it doesn't mean that I agree with you just because I'm listening to you. And there are a variety of techniques where you can say things like, I heard you say XYZ, did I get it right? So I'm not agreeing with you. I'm just asking if I heard you say it. I'll go a little further, and I know we're almost at time, but it's so important to me. If somebody says something truly hateful, which lots of people do, right? Like, it's one thing to say, I disagree with you. It's another thing to say something that is hateful. We are able to put sort of bounds, and we have a discussion about what's free speech versus hate speech, which of course is a topic of much discussion across our universities particularly, but across our country. But our kids, they have the answer much better than we do. What they have said when I've listened to them in these conversations, and incidentally, once you set up the conversation, adults aren't allowed to speak, only the kids, which is beautiful and the hardest thing for me, because, you know, I kind of sit here with like sitting on my, I don't know, biting my tongue, because of course we want to jump in, but the goal is to let them speak. The kids have said, if I don't speak to the kid who is spewing hate speech, and if I shun them and push them away, the people who will speak to that person are going to pull them more into an extremist view. And they're right. So it's a question that is unresolved for us, but that we ask our kids to grapple with, right? If I don't speak to the kid who's spewing white supremacy, the white supremacists will talk to him. They'll meet his need for belonging pretty well. So what are we going to do here? And I don't have an answer to that question, but I think we better be asking that question.
Well, I would suggest that you expand your program to clergy as well, not just teachers, but I think it would be a really great program to be available to clergy.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
And I appreciate you, and it was a great presentation. As
Thank you. Thanks for
Ross just
having
said, he had
me.
to leave. It was a superb, as Ross said, superb presentation, and really amazing that you're doing this in the very real world, in the very concrete situations, and it's very inspiring to know that this is how change takes place. You're demonstrating how change takes place. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for sharing it with us, and look forward to opportunities for us to work together in some of the stuff that we're doing as well.